evening. I'm Suzanne Nossel. I'm the Executive Director of PEN America. Last summer, when we started to think about this year's PEN World Voices Festival, I knew I wanted to focus on gender and power. I could just see it. Our first woman president standing shoulder to shoulder with the heads of state of Germany, the UK, Chile, Brazil, and South Korea. A woman Secretary General at the United Nations. I wrote a column about how the world could change with so many women in charge. Advances for women in the workplace and family leave, new models of decision-making. My editors gave it the headline, "The Women on Top Theory." It was a theory, all right? The morning after the election, the world looked dark. Suddenly, we were back playing defense. Defending free expression, open discourse, and dialogue across boundaries. Defense of the rights of minorities, Muslim Americans, and of course women. Supporters of Planned Parenthood received a message right after the election. It was about words. It said, let's get all these words out of the way. Devastated, angry, heartbroken, outraged, discouraged, exhausted, shattered. And now, 4 more words. The most important ones. These doors stay open.
Yeah.
I went on to say, if you want to stay in bed or hide from the world, I can't blame you, but I hope you won't. I hope you won't. When I think of the word defense, it sounds reactive, negative, defensive. When I think of Cecile Richards, I think not of defense, but of defense. Defense of values, defense of freedoms, defense of individual dignity and autonomy. In this country, we pay tribute to those who sacrifice their time, devote their careers, and put themselves at risk in order to defend our freedom. We're moved by their willingness to stand in harm's way to safeguard our way of life and the world in which we want to raise our children. We know that defense involves foresight, strategy, cunning, and courage. That defense of our freedom doesn't only happen in the Middle East, the South China Sea, or the Korean Peninsula. It happens right here at home, in our courtrooms, clinics, and the halls of Congress. Cecile Richards is the de facto Secretary of Defense for women's rights and freedoms. She's at the vanguard of the fight for our reproductive choice, our physical well-being, our mental health, our economic security, and our equality of opportunity. She's fearless, outspoken, undaunted, and indefatigable. Even Donald and Ivanka Trump are a little afraid to take on Cecile Richards. Today may go down in history as a dark day. A 4-margin vote in the U.S. House of Representatives to defund Planned Parenthood and disable the Affordable Care Act. On a day like this, when people may feel devastated, angry, and heartbroken, we look to Cecile to remind us that, in her words, these doors stay open. With everything she has to do tonight, and this week, and this month, and this year, at the ramparts, guarding all of us, we are so honored that Cecile Richards has taken the time to be with PEN America and all of you tonight. Please welcome her. So, Cecile, I have to start with today, sort of the elephant in the room, and
literally.
Everybody's going to go home and tell their family and their friends that they saw you here tonight. They're going to want to know, what did she say? What did she tell us? How screwed are we? And how do we keep those doors open?
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me, Suzanne, and thanks for all the good work you do. And to all the journalists that are here and folks who write for a living. We've never needed a free press more than we do today in America, so thank you. Thank you for your work. Yeah, so today was, well, let's back up. Actually, of course, this bill that does so much harm to women, potentially, if it becomes the law, was supposed to have been signed and on the president's desk and signed by January 27th, and today's May 4th. So the good news is the resistance is working in America. So I think we have to measure success now in different kinds of ways than we would have if the election outcome had been different. Today, of course, for those of you who have been blissfully off of Twitter, the House of Representatives jammed through a bill that really very few members of Congress, I think, had read, and certainly the Congressional Budget Office hadn't even scored in terms of its impact, both fiscal impact and impact on folks. And they passed it barely, as you say, with a 4-vote margin. They lost 20 Republicans, and not a single Democrat voted for this bill. So to say it's unpopular is really an understatement. There's a lot of things in the bill, and we can talk about them, but of course, one of the things that has been foremost on the mind of some of the leaders and Speaker Ryan was ending access to Planned Parenthood for women on Medicaid, patients on Medicaid. And that means that millions of folks who come to us for cancer screenings and for family planning, particularly in medically underserved areas, will no longer be able to go to Planned Parenthood for that care. And that is going to be devastating because we've seen in states where they already try to do things like that, like my home state of Texas, that the impact is immediate on women, and particularly women with low income, women of color. But that was only one part of this. I mean, this is a bill that the last estimate was that 24 million people in this country will lose their health insurance coverage. Of course, one of the things we fought for so hard under President Obama was to get sort of equity in terms of the healthcare system for women, and that pretty much all just got thrown out. So there will now be harder to get maternity coverage, harder to get family planning. As we say, you know, supposedly the pro-family party just passed a bill that would basically make it harder to not get pregnant, harder to have a healthy pregnancy, and harder to raise a child if you know. And then, of course, so many other things that we got, like ending of gender rating so that insurance companies couldn't charge women more, that's all going to be gone. So basically, yet again, being a woman is going to be now a pre-existing condition in this country.
So, Cecile, you are at the forefront of the resistance. You resisted for 4 months, you put this off. What's next? You know, what do you say to people who, in this room and around the country, who want to stand up to this? You know, what does the next phase of the battle look like?
Yeah, no, I think it's incredibly important because actually I was so dismayed. I think probably folks in America that are trying to follow what's happening in Congress, which is really difficult, thought this bill had been defeated. It was so unpopular, and now it's sort of like, you know, was like a vampire kind of resurrected here, like Dracula, and it came like that, right? They just basically jammed this through without any conversation, without any public discourse, without any even debate about it. And so I think the important thing now is for everyone in this country to tell the story of what happened. Because if you watch the news right now, it's literally like watching some kind of like sports coverage of a basketball game, and sort of like who won, who lost, you know, they got 4 more points than the other guys, and then they go have a big kegger and celebrate, right? I mean, that is essentially the sort of the content or lack thereof. And so right now, the most important thing that we can do, I believe, is first, we got to stop this bill in the United States Senate, and that is a place where cooler heads prevail, and so every single person I was over in the Senate today and talking to some of the senators, and this bill is wildly unpopular, but I think there's also certainly a risk that Senator McConnell is going to it's such a stinker, he's just going to try to get it through. No, seriously, that's their mentality. It's like the more this gets out there, the more people hear about it, the less popular it is, and the more people that when these guys go back home, because of course they're mainly guys, they go back home and they have to deal with a lot of women in pink pussy hats with Planned Parenthood signs and patients telling their stories, and they don't like that. So I think right now it's the Senate is the focus, but I also think you are the truth tellers. I mean, this is a time in which the attention span of the television sort of reporting is so limited, and also there's so many horrible things happening all the time out of this White House. This is a really important time for journalists to tell the story of the impact. And can I just give a shout out, I don't know who else is here tonight, but a lot of the stories about what's happening in this legislation, what's happening to people with low incomes, what's happening to people of color, immigrants, refugees, they've really been led by, the stories have been told by women's media. And so I just have to really give a shout out to the fact that women's media has completely radically reshaped coverage of a lot of these issues. So if you're out here,
me a good segue to a connection that I want to try to draw between your work and our work at PEN America, which is around the ways that free expression is impaired in the fight for reproductive rights. And that censorship has dogged this battle for a century, back to the days when Margaret Sanger's public speeches were banned and she was prohibited from even talking about her ideas, and now we have the revival of the global gag rule prohibiting U.S. funding for organizations that so much as talk about abortion around the world, laws that enforce and restrict what doctors can say to their patients here in this country. What is this nexus between reproductive rights and repression? Why repression of speech? Why is it that in this area, and I think it's pretty unique from what I know in terms of other aspects of health policy or even other issues, that the notion that there can be legislative mandated constraints on speech and on the spread of ideas seems to kind of have unique currency in this arena. And I'm wondering, why you think that is and what we can do about it.
Well, you're absolutely right, and there are a number of examples, and I think it's sort of a combination of sort of two toxic forces of repression and sexism, and they really are combined in somebody that certainly legislation we see. In fact, we were just talking backstage about a bill that the Texas Senate just passed, which essentially would allow doctors to lie to women, pregnant women, about the state of their pregnancy. So, yeah. So if you've been watching The Handmaid's Tale or anything, we are not actually so
Last
far.
panel was on dystopia. So.
Oh, it was? Okay. I'm glad I missed that. Because I was just in Washington, D.C., and I feel like it's being acted out in real time. But literally they passed a bill that said a doctor could not reveal to a woman the status of her pregnancy, of any fetal abnormalities, by protecting them from ever being sued because they didn't reveal this information. I'd love to say that Texas is breaking new ground and that this is the first time we've seen it, but it is not. This is actually becoming more and more common. So literally allowing doctors to withhold information from women. We have, of course, rampant examples in states of the states, I think something like 23 states, so this may not be, it's in the 20s, states have mandated information that has to be given to women who are pregnant, and a third of that information, the research shows, a third of that information is actually inaccurate. And so in a lot of states we have doctors who are being forced to give women misinformation, and women who are seeking abortion services. I think there's the other thread of this, which is the thought that somehow women are incapable of making decisions without the interference of politicians, other people. So again, a lot of what we see, and this has become very common now, and in fact this just happened in Iowa, is that women have to, if they want to seek to terminate a pregnancy, they have to, there's a waiting period. There is they have to watch certain kind of state mandated information, a whole host of things that basically say to women, you obviously are not capable of making one of the most important personal decisions that women make in their lifetime, which is whether or not to have a child. And so I think that is absolutely a theme, and I think we're seeing more and more of that. I wish that it was as hard to buy a gun in these states as it was to actually make a decision.
Over the last 4 or 5 months, we've become fixated on this question of fake news and how it's distorting our discourse, and sort of fake news in two senses. I mean, one, actual misinformation and propaganda and pseudoscience that's being disseminated with the veneer of credibility, and then there's also, the false cries of fake news, calling, true news reports, scientific facts, intelligence fake. So it's distortion on both sides, and based on your experience, where pseudoscience has been promulgated by states, in some cases legislated, forced on doctors and patients, you're sort of, in a sense, a canary in the coal mine, and you've been breathing in what we're now choking on, and we're struggling with, how to deal with this. We're a free expression organization. A lot of this information is false, but we wouldn't argue necessarily to outlaw it. And so the question I have is, what have you found ways to elevate the truth, to counter, these false facts, the pseudoscience? How do you help people sort through that and understand what they can believe?
So it's interesting. Yes, I do think Planned Parenthood, in some ways, our own experience in the last 3 years by some of the undercover video attacks that were, of course, proven to be false and proven to be completely inaccurate, but nevertheless did a lot of damage. 5 congressional investigations later, you name it. So I wish I had an answer for this, because it's the most common question that I get asked is, what do we do about this proliferation of completely inaccurate information? And I don't really know. I do have some feelings that sometimes, the truth eventually will out, I hope, but a lot of people can get hurt in the meantime. My own experience was, of course, being called before a congressional committee for a cool 5 hours of testimony, although there really wasn't a lot of chance to testify, because most of it was taken up by a lot of mansplaining, actually, by members of Congress. But it is sort of, I guess I just have to take a moment to laugh because we have so few opportunities. But one of the actually, the opening of that hearing, where the chair of this committee, a very powerful member of Congress, basically is so excited to get me there in front of the committee so that he can do this big reveal of his chart that is, he said, is a Planned Parenthood chart that shows something about our medical procedures, and it basically, as Rachel Maddow said later, it didn't even have a y-axis. It was just sort of two arrows going in different directions. Oh, wow, if you have it. It's kind of anyway, it's sort of interesting. But thank goodness because I said, well, that's not from us. I don't know where that's from. But then, of course, my lawyer said, tapped me on the shoulder. He said, well, actually, that was created by, I think it may not be Americans United for Life, but it's some kind of anti-choice group. And it's printed out there on the bottom of the shirt, for God's sake. And, of course, Jason Chaffetz said, well, we're going to get to the bottom of that. It was his own chart, but in any case. He actually, I don't know if you can follow this, but recently he announced he's actually retiring from the United States. That's not to say, look, and words matter, and I know that you all struggle with these issues. We saw, as a result of that sort of fake news attack, that things were said by people running for office, by people in office, that were horrific about Planned Parenthood, about our services, about our employees, about our patients. And I kept saying, and a lot of other folks kept saying, words matter. And what you are saying is inciting, it was increased picketing at women's health centers, harassment, and then, of course, what we all feared happened in that a gunman shot 3 people outside of our Colorado Springs health center. And so, while I appreciate free speech and will fight like the devil to defend it, politicians and people in office who have a responsibility to tell the truth about things have an outsized, I think, role in combating this kind of hate speech, because people's lives are impacted. And in that case, of course, it was devastating.
So, one of the things we think about is, well, looking at the larger problem of fake news, the news media is responding pretty well, like pretty robustly. They're kind of going after these things, and, they're dogging. There have been so many great investigations, and, we all, there are people who were outside the White House Correspondents' Center cheering for the first time and, saying, you go. And, there's a sense almost among the readership of the New York Times, the Washington Post, that, we're kind of holding up rather well. But what I'm curious about is, you're from Texas. How is this playing out?
I love how she says that. And then there's Texas.
But how is this, are we falsely comforting ourselves
Yes.
with the idea that kind of we're all in this together and the media's hanging tough and he's being called out and he looks so ridiculous. I mean, what do they think about these debates, where you're from and elsewhere around the country, you travel all the time, how is this playing out there? What do you hear in Colorado Springs and elsewhere?
Well, I mean, I think it's incredibly difficult to get good information, and again, I think social media, which we may talk about, has been an incredibly important development. Just in my time at Planned Parenthood, which is, for the first time, stories of people who cannot get on the front page of the New York Times, the Washington Post, finally stories of people of color, of women, of LGBT people are being told on social media, people's personal lived experience that frankly has never happened before. And so I go home to Texas, and one of the few reasons that I believe actually, it's so interesting because the media does play such an important role. We had a big battle in Texas over HB2, it was called. It was the most restrictive abortion legislation in the country, and that was of course when folks took over the Capitol for days on end and testified till 2 and 3 in the morning. And it was really, and of course Wendy Davis did her historic 13-hour filibuster, and it just sort of shook the world, but it really would not have been reported, I believe, without the Texas Tribune, which is a very highly skilled, good reporters who actually have covered the stories of the impact of these kinds of bills on women there in Texas. And because of that, these stories have kind of rolled up. And then, I remember that night being in the Capitol when Barack Obama, his own self, tweeted, "Something's going on in Texas tonight." And it was a chance for millions of people to kind of be tuned in. But if we had waited for what I think of as the sort of frontline mainstream media to cover these stories, they simply wouldn't be covered. And there's very little, as anyone who's doing media out in the States, there's, the newsrooms have been decimated. There's not a lot of, the same person who's like interviewing you is holding the camera and like holding the microphone and trying to figure out what you're talking about. And so I think it is a real challenge right now. And I'm grateful to the Washington Post. I feel like they've been really just setting a new standard for reporting on this White House. But we need a lot more in the States because it's not good enough to have this information in Washington and New York and not in Michigan and Wisconsin and Nevada.
About social media and particularly one problem that we've started to try to confront for our community of writers is the issue of sort of trolling and harassment online and how difficult it can be to wade into these very hot button issues. And it's a third rail. You write about something controversial or you express yourself in a way that piques people's interest or angers people, and then their vitriol can be saved in perpetuity. I mean, every time I actually have this. Every time I Google my name, there are things people said about I was against or for the Iraq War, but I was against it. And you can never live it down. You can't you can't rewrite that record for accuracy. You've been in the vortex of that, targeted for years, and you have withstood it, at least from, where I sit, and I think where our audience sits, with incredible kind of grace, composure, calmness, and resolve. And I'm wondering what you say to women who may want to be part of these debates, who may have stories to tell, perspectives they want to air, but they're really afraid of stepping in and having to be on the receiving end of a barrage that they may not be able to stop once it starts.
So I guess my first rule is don't read the comment section. Just don't read the comment section because it's not but you do have to recognize that, look, if your role in life is to actually make social change and challenge authority and try to make things better than they are, there are going to be people that come after you. And I think if there aren't, then you're probably not doing your job. And so, I don't mean to be flip about that. Actually, there was a funny thing that I saw Hillary Clinton said the other day, which is like, if I had fewer trollers and like hate speech online, I probably would be taking more walks in the wood, but instead I'm going to go and fight back. And so I think in a way, it does remind you that our work is definitely is not done. I I think it is so important, though. I mean, and maybe women are more prone to this, I don't really know, because people always say, oh my God, I don't know how you do that, or the people must be so mean to you, and all that, but I will tell you, and just like coming here on the subway, someone stopped me and said, are you Cecile? And she said, thank you, because Planned Parenthood helped me when I was, when I didn't have access to healthcare coverage. Sorry, that gentleman just put something there. I was trying to figure out what it was. Like, oh no, something more has happened. No, I was like, it was a panic. They couldn't have voted again already. Right. Yeah, it's not even 9 yet. Anyway, I think it's, anyway, I was just saying, someone was thanking me, and like the vast majority of people are so grateful for what Planned Parenthood does, and because 1 in 5 women in this country have been to Planned Parenthood for healthcare, and I feel like I've talked to pretty much every one of them. And so I do think it's important that, we're not in this business to be loved. We're in this business to make a difference in people's lives. And when you do, it's worth whatever other chatter and hate speech and, trolling is going on, because those people are doing that because they have nothing better to do. And we have something more important to do.
What you make of this debate that has kind of reared its head over the last few months over reproductive rights as a kind of litmus test of progressivism. And those who've argued that whether it's the Women's March or candidates for office around the country, the progressive tenets ought to be flexible, and we ought to be open, and there ought to be room for people who are not with you on these issues to stand as candidates or to march on Washington, along with other women. What's your take on that?
I mean, I have several thoughts, but I'd say, look, anyone can run for office. I mean, that's their right, but Planned Parenthood Action Fund will never support anyone who's not 100% for women's rights. And that's our job. We're not a party, but we are a movement that believes that women's rights are fundamental to any progressive agenda. And I've said that repeatedly to members of those parties. I do think it's a dangerous arena when, and this, usually the conversations happen with people who live in, what I say, blue states, let's say. So I'm from Texas, which is really an advantage. And look, we're proud at Planned Parenthood. We provide health care to thousands of women in Texas, and they deserve every single right as any woman in New York State, right? I mean, that's basically the bottom line. And in some ways, they need us to fight harder for them than anyone, because it is tough where they live. So I think it's incredibly important that as we build, we obviously have a lot of work to do in this country to build a bigger progressive movement, and I think we're on that way. I have never seen it. I've been an organizer all my life. I've never seen this kind of activism in my entire career, but we're not going to do it in the backs of anyone. Not women, not immigrants, not LGBT people, not working people, and that's just that's really, and I don't just want to say that to pander. I actually think that's what this country wants. They want to believe that there is a party that believes in the people in this country, and kind of all means all. So I also think the last thing I'll say on this, because I think there's a real sort of false, it's not the right question, because I have been, I'm going to give you one really quick example, because I do think it's important for those of you who live in New York State, maybe don't get out that much. We ran, I mean, I don't blame you, that's okay, or whatever, but, so there's 2 states in this country, South Dakota and Mississippi, that are, if you really were looking at a map, you'd say those are probably 2 of the most conservative, if not the most conservative states in the country. And in each of those states, they, over the course of the last decade, they tried to ban abortion. The legislature's passed bills that would make it illegal for a woman to have a legal abortion. And those issues, that both of them went to the ballot and ballot measures. And it's really fascinating, because if you polled the people of those states and used what I think is really outdated, irrelevant nomenclature, sort of pro-choice, pro-life, they would have said it was a pro-life state. Well, this would, in both of those states, in South Dakota twice, in Mississippi once, we defeated those abortion bans going away. And that means the people of those states voted down abortion bans. And I think it is really important because this is something where I think politicians have really don't understand how the American people feel about these issues. First, the vast majority of people in this country believe that Roe was rightly decided and that abortion should be safe and legal for women in this country. But the second thing is, people are equally capable of having their own personal feelings about abortion and also recognizing that it is not their right to make that decision for every woman in America. Language is we're talking past each other because, again, I'm sure there's people in the Democratic Party or other parties that I disagree with on a lot of issues, and they can have their own personal feelings, but the question is, what do you think the government should be able to do? And I think, again, this is where I just think there is huge agreement in this country, is that people don't think that the government should be making decisions for individual women about their pregnancies. Stop.
So, to pick up on that, when you look at how the election played out, and particularly kind of how women voted, I think a lot of us were shocked and stunned at a couple of things. But first of all, the 62% of white women who voted for Donald Trump, and also the Access Hollywood video and the other revelations about his treatment of women and the fact that women overlooked that a substantial portion of women were willing to overlook that at the ballot box. And obviously they were willing to, women and men. I mean, I'm struck by those statistics in South Dakota and Mississippi, that a majority voted to overturn an abortion ban, and yet, one of his firmest commitments, and I think the reason a lot of people did vote for Trump was his commitment to appointing a Supreme Court justice, who, might vote against Roe. So I'm wondering, how do you make sense of kind of the salience question? I mean, are these issues, are women, or particularly white women, just not treating those concerns, whether it's around reproductive rights or broader questions of the treatment and place of women as high priorities as they decide, how to cast their vote at the ballot box? And so why not? And, do we have to change that? And how do we change that, if so?
Right. There's a lot of questions in there, but they're all really, really good ones. So I just want to say one thing before we get to white women, and that is that one of the things that is really underreported, and was underreported when President Obama won those two elections, and it was underreported in this election, is that the most reliable voter for Democratic candidates for president, and frankly for any office, are women of color. And they are the reason. They are, it's stunning, it's staggering, and I just think it doesn't get enough recognition. And again, I think this is one of the problems we see in the parties, is that they take advantage of the folks, whoever they may be, that are always reliable, and then they go off and sort of in the search for the, Midwestern white man, disenfranchised, whatever. And I think it's important to remember to dance with them who brung you, as we say in Texas. And obviously, we got a lot of work to do with white women in this country. And there's no denying that it was an enormously disappointing election in terms of who turned out. And I think, obviously, we're learning a lot more. I will say, although we lost in critical states by very, very narrow margins, I think it's really important, before we just completely despair, to know that 3 million more people voted for Hillary Clinton than voted for Donald Trump. That's just true. I also know that from looking back at the research, that at least every bit of research I've looked at say that the most negative thing for Donald Trump, that he actually, folks had to vote for him despite it, were his attitudes towards women and his statements towards women. Now, it's extraordinary to me that any woman could look at both, not only what he's said, but now what he's done and support him. So we got a lot of educational work to do. But I mean, this election was so complicated. There's a lot to dig into. But I guess those are sort of like a couple of thoughts.
Yeah. I mean, is there anything when you go around and talk, particularly to women around the country who don't support you, who question what you're doing, your agenda, why it should be the litmus, a kind of fundamental issue, an issue on which there should be no room for compromise. Like, is there any insight that you've been able to glean about what is, what that psychology is? Is this sort of an internalization of sexism? Are they deferring the decision to, a man, their father, their husband, their upbringing? Like, I'm curious really what you make of it.
So that's a fairly heavy psychological analysis of, like, I don't know, of the motivation. So, I mean, I think there's no one answer to this, and I do think, and for years I was a union organizer. Long before I came into doing this work, I worked with low-wage women in hotels and nursing homes and janitors who cleaned office buildings, and I just think I appreciate the economic anxiety that a lot of folks in this country are living with, and I don't think that perhaps that was recognized and understood as it needed to be, and it was clearly a huge factor in this election. But I don't want to. So I don't like it when people say, and not that you said this, but I think sometimes they say, like, well, why are people voting against their own interests? Well, it's like sometimes you just don't know what their interests are. And so I think it's really important before we sort of just dismiss people that we actually do dig in a little bit more and understand. I also think there were half the voters didn't vote. There's a lot of people who just didn't go to the polls because they either thought it didn't matter or that the election was done or whatever. And of course, that's what I see, and I'm as concerned about not only about people who perhaps voted for a president who's now, every day taking away or doing things to try to take away women's rights. I'm as concerned about the millions of people in this country who didn't vote. If we don't figure that out, then shame on us. So that's a big part of the work I'm interested in.
I'm curious about this sort of digging in piece. It's something we've been thinking about at Penn because of our nearly 5,000 members. More than half of them are outside of the coasts in the middle of the country, and we're looking at different ways to engage them and kind of better understand, what the calculus is, how they think about the interests of their community, how they tie it to questions of policy in Washington, and also figuring out on our issues, which are around press freedom and the defense of truth and free expression. What are the ways of communicating those issues in those communities in a manner that actually is going to get across and not just kind of get people's backs up and maybe even run the risk of entrenching the divisions and the polarization. I'm curious, in the work of Planned Parenthood, how that kind of comes up, and are there ways through storytelling or other methods, where some of the barriers to understanding can be surmounted? Are there different ways that we need to talk and think and reach out in order to, get beyond some of this polarization that you confront and that we confront?
The first thing is just, I think, to be a good organizer or a good understander, you have to be a good listener. And I don't think that we've been listening to people as much as we should or could. And because people, I think folks are eager, I think, to talk about what's on their mind. And I actually just, this is like a Planned Parenthood example, but I was concerned when Paul Ryan said he was going to defund Planned Parenthood. I went out to his district. He's from Kenosha, Wisconsin, or close to Kenosha, and we have 3 health centers in Kenosha and Racine and another town, and for thousands of women come to us every year for family planning. And it's really interesting. I went and met with some of them, and they, right now, I didn't ask them, whether they voted or how they voted. It wasn't about that. It was really just about their lives, and they're terrified. And now they're terrified, not only because the economy is tough, but now they're terrified because they're going to lose their health care. And it was really fascinating because what we're seeing, again, is so much organic sort of things just being created on the ground. I met a young woman named Lori Hawkins. She was a Planned Parenthood patient. Actually, we had detected her an ovarian issue she had, and anyway, she finally got treatment. She now has a 13-year-old daughter, and she really had come because she said, I just want to say thank you because I wouldn't have been able to have my daughter if I hadn't been able to go to Planned Parenthood at a time in which I had no insurance. And she's scratching her head trying to figure out, why is Paul Ryan trying to end access to this healthcare provider that's in my community? And but it's just sort of interesting to see how these stories go on, because Lori not only then came to talk to me, but she said, you know, we decided we need to start organizing. So we've organized now in this community something called Forward Kenosha, and we have 1,500 members. She said, I've always been kind of a quiet person and never really, and a supporter, but never really done anything. And so we now have, you know, and we're meeting all the time. And then she just emailed me the other day, and she said, would you recommend me, because I'm thinking about running for office in Kenosha, Wisconsin. There are so many but I mean, and that isn't, I was just in Indianapolis, again, like the sort of the reddest of the red areas there, you know, Indiana, and another woman said to me, me and this other woman after the election, we were so worried, and so we decided we would just invite all the women we knew to come to a meeting. We thought we'd have 100 people. We had 900 people, and now they have 15,000 members, and they are organizing, they're running folks for office and stuff. And so, again, I think it's important to talk to people about where they're at, and I also think it's important to give people opportunities to express themselves and to participate in government and to run for office in ways that I think folks had never imagined doing. And that's what I'm actually seeing. I guess it's not really an answer to your question, but it's just something that's on my mind, is that I think folks are now feeling like they want to and they have to do more than they have ever done before, things they had never imagined doing in their lifetime. And that is incredibly exciting.
It is very inspiring. We at Penn, we give out an annual Free Expression Courage Award, and we gave it to the Women's March. And it was really for their role in, I think, catalyzing and leading this. I mean, I think if you hadn't had the Women's March, people would not have gone out to the airports. I don't think they would have gone to the town hall meetings. I think, you know, there was a concern, I remember before that weekend, well, it's a march, you know, what is it really going to amount to? It's just going to dissipate, it's a one-day thing. And I think it has everything to do with the phenomenon that you're talking about. You are a lifelong activist, and I'm really curious, you know, what you think about kind of how we sustain this, and you know what is going to turn this, you know, moment of the spark being lit and all these people who are energized and galvanized into, you know, something that can last for 4 or 8 years, because we lost an incredible amount of ground.
4 years. 4
years to a major victory, but maybe a few decades as a long-term movement that can enact some transformative change. So
right. Can we go back before we have to leave the march? Because again, it was, I don't know how many of you all took part in the march. I've been marching my whole life, and then it was really fun because I was flying up from Miami. I had just made a speech and was flying up that night, and of course I was anxious because I thought I gotta get there, it's Friday night, and because the march the next morning, and so the plane is packed, and some guy is standing there like a few rows up, and he is trying to cram a sign in his overhead compartment. And so of course me and the guy next to us said, show us your sign, and he turns around, it's like this really super tall guy. He turns around and says, his sign, obviously a handmade sign, says, I am really upset. And it was just like emblematic to me of like, you know, everyone was just like, we gotta be there. And of course he did that, and everyone pulled out their pussy hats, and the whole plane was just like a party on to Washington. But I think that the thing that was important to me about the marches, as you talk about like how do we move this forward, is the thing that was stunning, and Washington was amazing, because literally it wasn't even a march because you could not move, because you know people just kind of like moved in one place. But the thing that struck me about that day was it wasn't only in New York and Washington and San Francisco. There were marches obviously in all continents, including Antarctica. There were 10,000 people in Salt Lake City, Utah. The largest march in the history of Austin, Texas. 50,000 plus people. People in Fairbanks, Alaska in a snowstorm. And to me, that was what the march said, was this is not a coastal thing. This is not a one-day thing. This is a movement of people who are desperately committed to their country and values that we share together. And as you say, we have now seen that continue on. And Look, a lot of people participated, and I think one of the great things about the marches is it wasn't only women, and we saw fathers marching for their daughters. We saw brothers and husbands and grandfathers, and I think that that is an important tipping point to remember, and why I have faith we will ultimately defeat this bill that was passed today by the House, and that is because I believe now in this country, fathers fundamentally believe that their daughters should have every single right and opportunity that their sons have, and that is a new thing in America. And that you cannot see your daughter and hope for her, whether it's an education or career or living her best life, and not fundamentally understand that means she has to be able to have her own bodily autonomy. And that is just, I think, something that is a new thing. And so I feel safe that we're going that direction. But as you said, what we've seen, because we've been, it wasn't like the march wasn't the end, it was the beginning, and a lot of other things have happened. We've seen record turnout across the country at town halls, record numbers of people calling Congress. I mean, the first day that Paul Ryan said he was going to shut down or defund Planned Parenthood, you literally could not get a call into his office within 2 hours. Repeatedly, the switchboards have been overwhelmed in the U.S. Congress, historic numbers. And I saw one piece of research that the most commonly used patch-through phoning program tracked it, and 86% of the phone calls that were coming to Congress were coming from women. Okay, so that's and so if we got all the men to do it too, we're going to really take over. And I think the last thing I'd say that has been fascinating is to see a generation of folks. Like, I've been marching all my life, right? I mean, I started from as a toddler, and that was just my folks. That was my upbringing. But now I'm seeing, 14, 15, 16-year-olds who are just rocking it out there. I mean, they are, this is now their awakening and their chance. And I was just in Arizona with a young woman named Deja Fox. You should look her up online. 16 years old, went to a town hall meeting for Senator Jeff Flake when he finally had one. Hundreds of people. She literally spoke truth to power in a way that I haven't seen. She said, I'm a young woman of color on my own. You are a man. You are a white man. You're privileged to have the health care. So how are you taking away my opportunity to go to Planned Parenthood, to have birth control, to finish high school, to go on to college and live my best life? This is a 16-year-old. And that to me is how a movement is lasting, is that now the ownership and the leadership of this is by a whole new generation of folks who are I think are going to change this country.
I have a question. With all this sort of angst and despair in the post-election moment, part of me has kind of comforted myself with just that very idea that, like, the generational change is actually, going to fix this. Because my kids have grown up with, LGBT rights as a, completely normal and integrated part of their lives. Of course, women's rights, racial justice. These are just things that, growing up here in New York City, they look at very differently than even my generation. They're just much more natural and endemic for them. And we've done a lot of work on campus speech and those controversies. And we also see kind of a rising generation that has, in many ways, kind of radically progressive attitudes. And I'm wondering what you think. I mean, is your work, the work of Planned Parenthood, and all of these struggles going to be still ongoing 50 years from now? Do you think this generation is, these are going to become battles of the past? Finally.
I hope so. So we just turned 100 years old. Okay. And so, because I think it is sometimes important when you're facing just this onslaught. I think 100 years ago, women didn't have the right to vote. Birth control was, not only birth control was illegal, but even a pamphlet about birth control was illegal. Our founder was thrown in jail for handing out a pamphlet to an undercover cop posing as a mom. But the great thing is, she was thrown in jail where she taught all of her fellow inmates about birth control, right? And the movement was started. And so when I think about where we were at, here we are 100 years later. abortion is not only, it's safe, it's legal, and it's actually one of the safest medical procedures for women in this country, right? Birth control is not only legal because we organized and agitated, and young people dressed up in giant birth control packs and went on every college campus in America. We got birth control covered under the Affordable Care Act, and 55 million women now get it at no cost under their insurance plan, right? So that's progress, and we got to fight to keep that. I'm just saying, because that's on the chopping block too. And the same information that we were handing out, or Margaret and Ethel were handing out 100 years ago, or I think actually it's gotten a little bit better. You can now get 24/7 online from Planned Parenthood, 6 million people plus a month due. We just booked our 2 millionth appointment on a mobile phone for a health center visit at Planned Parenthood. We now text and chat with 20,000 young people every month about things that they may not have anyone in their hometown to talk to about. And so I just feel like Tony Kushner wrote in Angels in America, "The world only spins forward." And I fundamentally believe that. Even if some mornings, I swear to God, I wake up and I go, how did that boulder roll all the way down the hill? I swear last night when I went to bed, it was up there. And I mean, none of this happens without organizing. And even when I think about young people, and one of the things I really am an evangelist on is, if we would invest more resources in young people and give them the opportunities to participate in organizing, in movement building, in speaking out, in public speaking, in media, that's when we really can see change. And so I don't think these things just happen. I also think we have obligations as folks who have been in movements a long, long time to bring every single young person along and give them the opportunity to lead.
I'm going to pose one more question, and then I'm going to open it up to the audience. I think there are going to be some mics that are set up on either side of the room, and if you want to think about your question, and then when the mics are present, you can line up, and we look forward to hearing from you. So, picking up on the 100th anniversary, something that I didn't know until I was preparing to talk with you tonight is that Planned Parenthood's work has expanded so significantly to include work with the transgender community and gender non-conforming individuals, including providing hormone treatments. And I'm curious what that transition was like for the organization. Was that something that everybody agreed on? Was it a subject of some debate internally? And kind of how did it change the organization's sense of identity to include that as part of your mission?
I mean, I think it's just sort of a logical evolution, but it has been very exciting. We're now, I mean, it's probably the fastest growing service. We're now in 16 states providing hormone replacement therapy, and particularly in some states where it's very, very difficult. There aren't a lot of other providers. But I mean, we've always had a very, I hope, strong relationship and commitment to LGBTQ rights and partnership. And I think we're constantly looking for new ways to expand our healthcare services as well. So it certainly was never a debate. I think the only debate is like, how much faster could we roll this out? And I was really shocked the other day to read somewhere that, and again, I don't know if this is completely accurate, but I think along with the VA, we're one of the largest provider of transgender services in this country, which probably only means we just need a lot more people, a lot more healthcare institutions doing it. I think the other piece of our work that we don't talk about as much, but is really important, is that we're the largest provider of sex education in America, and a lot of it's online, but a lot of it's in classrooms and community organizations. And one of my fears of this administration and the people they put in charge of Health and Human Services, which is a whole nother topic, is these are people who fundamentally do not believe in sex education. And this is coming at a moment in which we actually have reached an all-time historic low for teenage pregnancy in the US, because we're finally getting better information and healthcare availability out. And so it's going to be even more incumbent on us to ensure that young adults can get information no matter where they live, what their income is, what their geography is, because I think we're unfortunately, I'm worried we're going to be going back into kind of the dark ages on information. And of course, a lot of sex education is around sexual identity, sexual orientation. And can you imagine going to a school where the sex education program consists of don't have sex? And that, you know, in a lot of states, like my home state of Texas, that's sort of the standard. It's also probably why we have the second highest rate of repeat teen pregnancy in the country. And so I think we have to continually find ways to make sure that young people who have such aspiration and opportunity have ways to get both information that's non-judgmental, non-stigmatizing, and healthcare that they need regardless of where they live.
Okay. We have 2 mics on either side of the room, so if you have a question, I'll ask you to just come up to the mic, and I'll begin with you. Thank you. Please, you could just state your name.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth. I'm very nervous right now.
Why are you nervous?
I don't know. I'm not totally sure I know my thoughts right now.
That's okay. That's okay. There's no right or wrong.
I have a very New York specific question, which is sort of the newfound movements and all the grassroots and how much ever, you know, there's sort of a overwhelming amount of information. Everyone's really looking at, you know, what's happening nationally, and yet even in a state here like New York, we have a Republican-controlled Senate, and people are so focused on what's happening nationally that they're not even aware of what's happening in New York. As someone that's part of a grassroots organization, it's really hard to make people even aware of that. And like the Reproductive Health Act has passed the Assembly twice here. It has not passed the Senate because it's controlled by a Republican. Cuomo, who's a Democrat, but he has called for Roe v. Wade to be part of he's called for a constitutional convention, which wouldn't even happen until 2019. It's a total push-off of, basically, we don't have anything in place in New York to make abortion legal if it is banned on the federal level, and that is what many activists have been trying to do for years now. And as someone in the grassroots movement, it feels like we are calling, we're protesting all these things, and yet the overwhelming information on the federal level, it's hard to get through. So as an organizer, do you have any insight on how to do that?
Yeah. Well, first, thanks for being incredibly both informed and articulate about the problem we have here in New York. So I do think it would be dishonest if I didn't say folks are overwhelmed by all that's coming at us right now. I think all of us feel that. And so I guess we have to acknowledge that and then find a place that we can dig in and do the work that we can do. I fundamentally believe that absolutely nothing will happen to change anything in Washington, D.C. that doesn't come from the grassroots in the states. And so for example, I mean, this is a different example, but same kind, like, it's not like we're going to beat this bill in the Senate because we have smarter lobbyists in Washington, D.C. It's because people completely raise hell back in Nevada and Arizona and Alaska and all the states where folks live. And so I think the same is true here for New York. And the benefit you have is your 2 United States senators actually are fully supportive of all the issues we're talking about. And so there is absolutely no reason that folks in New York shouldn't be completely focused on getting things right in Albany. And it's a huge opportunity to do that. And I guess my only thing I would encourage you to do is think big, right? Because it's not just that we need to be organizing and letter writing and calling. We need to be running for office. And so I don't know what you're thinking about doing this next year, but I really think it's important. Yeah, let's have a run for office. I just think I think we have to, every one of us as organizers now have to be thinking about doing things that we just never imagined we could. And so, I mean, maybe it's not you, so I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I do think it's important that we recognize that it's not just going to be trying to change the minds of the people who are in there. I think it's a lot better to change their faces, and that means getting people to run for office. So thank you for what you're doing. Yeah, hang in there, okay?
We have a lot of questions, so I'm going to ask you to try to keep your questions short.
And I'll keep my answers shorter, so that was my fault.
That was a great answer.
Hi, my name is Cheryl, and thank you so much for being here first. And so my question is that with the rollback of women's rights, reproductive rights, and healthcare, a lot of minority women and women in low-income areas are going to be affected. But if you look at the activism in this country, let's say the Women's March, there have been questions raised about the inclusivity of the movement. So my question to you is, how do we make this movement more intersectional, and how do we include the voices and stories in this country affecting women that are different from the experience of white women?
So absolutely. No, I think it's absolutely right. And again, I think I guess my own approach to that has been to try to bring more young people into the movement, because frankly, this is the most diverse generation we've ever had, and that's where those are the folks I think that are basically now leading, and they're leading more and more institutions. I think that's critical. And I also think, and look, this has been some of my own learning experience at Planned Parenthood, which is like this, very, very large 100-year-old institution, is the importance of lifting up organizations that are small, locally led, RJ groups, RJ leaders who are doing critical work in communities and ensuring that, they not only have a place at the table, but that their stories and their lived experience are lifted up. I think it's getting better, but it's definitely not near enough. And I mean, it's just, this is not to pander, but I just can't help but just taking a poke at this, is like, when you look at the folks who are going to be impacted by the bill that just passed, if it should become law, primarily women of color, primarily women with low incomes, and then you look at the room of folks that negotiated this bill. Now, I don't know if that was lost on any of y'all,
But you see it in Cecile's Twitter page.
Well, this was crazy making. I'll tell you, actually, right before they were going to pass this bill, I was sitting in the Capitol, and they said, oh, the Freedom Caucus has just gone to the White House to negotiate the final details of this bill. And I was like, oh my God, I wish I could get a photograph of that meeting, because I bet it's going to be a bunch of white guys. And then Vice President Mike Pence tweeted out the photograph of all of them. And I was like, this is actually a really good photograph. I mean, it's not even a sneaky one. And but that was essentially the folks who were negotiating away maternity benefits for women, who were making policy that now would require women on Medicaid, who are mainly, obviously, many women of color, women on Medicaid who give birth, have to go back to work within 2 months in order to keep their health care coverage for them. Is this, so these stories, again, not to deflect, because we have a role in this too, these are the stories we have to lift up, because this is not the kind of country that we believe in. So thanks for asking your question, and thanks for fighting for the rights and the voices of everybody in this movement. It's really important.
Hi, my name is Sarah. I have two quick questions. One is, at what point is a physician blatantly lying to a woman about her health care, at the very least a violation of the Hippocratic Oath and potential for licensure loss, and at best case scenario, maybe even going to jail and being prosecuted? And my second question is with regard to messaging about women's health and women's rights. I get the feeling that the GOP and conservatives have sort of co-opted patriotism to the point that progressives tend not to focus too much on being patriotic. I think that is changing. I, for one, am more patriotic in the last few months than I have really been in my entire life.
Here.
And so I keep sort of thinking about messaging and this notion of, the original patriotism of don't tread on me and bodily autonomy, and where those things intersect, and if there's some value in changing that message a little bit to kind of get people on the other side to understand that we are in this together, we have some commonality here.
Yeah, no, I think those are really good points. And I obviously completely disagree with these kinds of laws that are being passed that allow doctors to mislead their patients or lie to their patients or withhold information. And I think there's nothing more horrifying for anyone to think about being pregnant and not actually being able to trust what your doctor is saying to you about your pregnancy. It's just beyond the pale. And obviously a lot of these laws are being passed, are being challenged. I agree that we shouldn't be back on our heels. We are the majority of this country, and we are patriotic, and I think sometimes, it concerns me even at Planned Parenthood, I will say, that, you know, people say, oh my God, you know, how do you deal? There's so much controversy. Well, 1 in 5 women in this country have been to us for health care. And the last poll before the last bill they tried to pass was 80% of Americans thought that Planned Parenthood should get federal funding for the services we provide. So why are we on defense? We've got to be on offense in America. And I think that's, and absolutely, I mean, one of the ironies to me about what is happening, not with the Republican Party writ large, because I think there's a lot of Republicans who are completely disgusted with what is happening at the leadership. But how did it get to be the Republican Party, which is the party of small government, you know, government stay out of our lives, they want government out of our lives completely unless it's in our uterus, and then they want it like all up in there. And that's just like, and honestly, that is where I do believe we are in the majority point of view, and we shouldn't be defensive. I think we have huge opportunities to organize more people on our side in red states, in blue states, all across America. So,
Thank you.
yeah, thanks a lot.
Hi, my name's Max. Thank you for all your work. So in the disability community, a lot of people don't love the way that disability is sometimes talked about in some pro-choice rhetoric, sort of talking about, oh, well, you know, if a fetus is disabled, obviously we all want to abort it, we can all agree on that. So at a time when it's so important to really strongly put forward this message that bodily autonomy is crucial, that reproductive rights are necessary, that abortions are necessary, how do we sort of balance that with having some nuance, like the importance of a strong message with the importance of holding some nuance around things like disability?
Right. Thank you, Max. And first of all, thank you to you or anyone here who works with the disability rights community, because I think that's another area that has really been underreported in this bill in terms of the legislation that are being proposed. It's just how, we can't, I mean, just like the night's not long enough to go through all that, but it's really important that these issues get raised up. And again, we feel strongly at Planned Parenthood that we trust women to be able to make their own decisions. And that is really fundamentally, I think, our position and what we fight for. And I think women make all kinds of complicated decisions about pregnancy all the time. And we feel confident that they are the ones, even if their decisions are difficult, that they're the best suited to make those decisions. And, you know, end of story. So, but I appreciate it. We've been proud to work with the disability rights community, and will continue to do so, because I think this is an area that is absolutely underreported and underappreciated, particularly when you have bills like this that are disadvantaging folks who have the least voice in America, and a lot of times it's that community. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Please.
Hi, I'm Ray. Thank you so much for everything you do. I just wanted to come back to what you're talking about with the media, and you spoke a little bit about how, you know, we need to be focusing more on the middle of the country, not just New York and not just Washington. We need to be focusing on being in touch, and you hear a lot lately that the Liberal Party or Democratic Party is out of touch. So I'm wondering just what's your advice for people who want to feel more in touch and want to feel more like they're getting, you know, especially when we're in our New York bubble, how are we getting all of the information and feeling in touch with everyone, not just in our safe space here?
Right. So, I mean, I don't know exactly what you do with your life, but I am telling young organizers that get out, move to another part of the country, and put down some roots and start organizing. Not because you know better or like, but I just, you know, I'm struck by how much folks in the rest of the country, they do feel, particularly progressives, feel really out on their own, and so I think it's just a good experience about learning how people are living in the rest of the country. Obviously, a lot of folks in New York that live, I mean, you've got family in Ohio and Indiana and Kentucky and Tennessee, and I think it's just important to like keep that conversation open, because one of my fears about this environment we're living in is that President Trump will be long gone, and he will have sown the seeds of division in this country that are going to take us years to repair, and we can't let him do that. Because I think to the earlier question, there's so much more that that joins us together than divides us. And I'm not sure the media is going to do a good job of reporting on that because, of course, that doesn't really make news. And so I think it's important that we listen to others, that we don't demonize others who disagree with us. We really try to understand where they're coming from. And I actually feel really hopeful about that. It's funny, there's one example, well, I actually kind of already used it, but it's just, I think we use labels sometimes, and I think we stigmatize people about like assuming certain things about them, and that's really kind of what happened to us, I believe, at Planned Parenthood. If I would say like a big mistake I think our movement made was we talked past a lot of people for a long time, and we said you're either pro-choice or pro-life, and we're only going to talk to people who agree with us all the time. And most people are sort of like somewhere in this kind of murky middle, and they actually don't like to have a label, and they don't like to, and they're not that political, but they have really authentic feelings. And again, what we found is when we quit trying to force people to like self-identify with some kind of label, we found we had so much more in common, and there were millions more people who actually supported what we believe in than we ever knew, but we had kind of talked past them. And so maybe I'm hoping that that's something that out of our learnings that can help us do better in this time in which we can't write off anybody in this country. So, move to Indiana. Okay.
We can't write off anybody in this country, but we're not going to be able to get to all of our questioners. I think we could take another...
I'll take everybody who's still in line.
Okay,
How's that?
that's great. Thank you so much, Cecile.
Yeah.
Let's try to keep it quick.
And I'll try to...
She's flying out to Michigan, some ungodly hour tomorrow morning. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Pearl, and I wanted to kind of go back to something you talked about earlier about dealing with trolls and online bullying. I help run a clinic escort program, and in our case, in our case, we can't not read the comment section because the comment section is screaming in our faces. So I was wondering if you had any suggestions on ways to process that and handle that in a productive manner, because sometimes it's just exhausting.
Yeah, and look, thank you thanks for being a clinic escort, and it's like amazing too. And I don't know, it's awful, I know, I feel you. I guess what I just feel like is that, just like I'd say, like, if you read the comment section, it's outweighed for me by the people who are actually coming up and saying thank you. To think about the folks that you're helping by being a clinic escort has got to outweigh whatever someone is yelling at you on the street, and that's just the only way I think we just kind of have to live with it. And thanks I know it's just hard to keep your cool sometimes, but thank you for doing it. It's really important work.
Hi, my name's Claire. When you testified at Congress, I watched it on C-SPAN, and
I wish you could get those 5 hours back. I'm sorry.
well, no, but I actually found it so incredibly inspiring, and I honestly do, whenever I'm feeling overwhelmed or kind of just lost, I do think, if Cecile can get through all of that nonsense, I can get through whatever else. And I think about those Republican leaders who came at you, and I think about those 20 Republican congressmen and women who voted, who broke ranks.
Right.
And I think, do you see any hope there? Like, is there a way to turn some of these Republicans and kind of make them see the light, maybe not on everything, but on the important things?
Absolutely. And look, I think there are Republicans in the U.S. Congress who fundamentally believe all the things that we're talking about here. They are simply terrified of being primaried by someone further to the right, and they have some justification in their mind that it's better for them to stay in. I just think we have to demonstrate that there is another way, and that there are people in this country who will support them, who will even cross party lines to support them if they will actually support the people in their district. And that is that's what we're saying right now, is that the more people are telling their stories and literally showing up in offices, showing up, calling in, it all matters. It absolutely matters. And we're going to be facing this again and again and again. And so I'd say absolutely don't give up. And people wonder, people always wonder, was it that call that mattered, or was it that phone, that letter I wrote, or was it that interaction? It all matters. And I think at the end of the day, it's going to take millions of us to turn this country back in a good direction. And so every single thing you do in the next 3 years, 4 years is critically important. So stay at it, okay?
Hi, my name is Joe.
Hey, Joe.
We've spoken about the incredible amount of activism going on, and thank you so much for being on the forefront of that. But I'm kind of looking ahead to 2020.
Yeah.
We've spoken about flip Republicans, right? But right now the Democratic Party is at the weakest it's ever been in my lifetime, at the local level, state level, federal level. And I'm wondering if you can elaborate to the extent possible on the efforts to cultivate a candidate for 2020, and see if I imagine that you're on the kind of like the forefront of that as well. Some of inside information.
I would actually say it's important to think about 2018 before 2020, because the only way we're going to win in 2020 is we win in 2018. And, it's really interesting because, and I'll say this on my C4 political side that I operate on, is that there are 23 members of Congress, Republican members of Congress, who are in districts that Hillary Clinton won. And so every one of those districts are ones that people should be running in. And I think that we have got to demonstrate that if you are, anti-woman, anti-LGBT, anti-immigrant, anti-working people, all of the issues that are frankly now getting voted on, then we're going to run somebody against you collectively and replace you in Congress. And unfortunately, that is the thing that's going to get people's attention. And then I think we do a good job in 2018. I think there are going to be a ton of people who want to run for president in 2020. And I wouldn't be surprised if it wasn't a woman, honestly. So I think I was saying, I saw Hillary the other night. I said, the thing about Hillary is she answered the question for all times, not if, but when. And we owe her, I think, an enormous debt of gratitude for being the first one, because it's very easy.
My name is Rose, and some of the things you've been saying tonight make me think of a phrase I've been using, beliefs that you don't believe. A lot of people have something that they put forward as a belief, like, oh yes, ask me about that, that's my position, yep, this really identified thing. But when you, I feel like if they are exposed to updated information or a personal experience that changes it, then suddenly they don't believe that at all. In my case, I grew up on the other side of the picket line from you. And it was my personal experiences when I became pregnant that changed my mind, based on the kindness I was taught from people I was taught to fear, and the opposite from people I was taught to trust. So in people with a less traumatic experience, how do you get that to become personal for them as opposed to digging in their heels?
Yeah. No, and thanks for being honest. And it's just people's lived experience that sometimes changes their mind. We see that every day at Planned Parenthood. People who are like outside picketing come in one day and say, this happened, and I need to be here. And so again, I think we just have to show empathy for people in this country. And again, that's what I meant, is like not stigmatizing. And look, I fall into the same thing. I mean, I've said some tacky things about some people in office, I'm not going to lie. But I do think it's important that we just continue, and for us, is like continue to put women at the center, and people at the center of the work that we do. And if we do, other things will kind of take the right direction. And we just have to be patient with people. People are hurting in this country, and I think we just have to be there and continue to reach out. I really do believe we're the majority in America, and it's just going to take some time. So thank you, though. Thanks for being here tonight.
Hi, my name is Josephine. I'm curious because we've talked about activism a lot, and you've mentioned a couple of things. You mentioned calling, protesting, and moving to another state.
It's just an idea I have. I don't know. I mean, I love New York. Don't get me wrong, but I just think it'd be a good time.
I grew up in Missouri, and then I moved here, so I don't see myself going back to Missouri. But But I remember at the Women's March in Washington, Michael Moore said, like, those of you who live in blue states, those of you who live in progressive states, what you can do is advocate for, because the policies in your state are eventually going to become the norm across the country. And I'm curious, do you have any advice like now for ways to get involved or ways to help out activism efforts in other states? And what can be done if you are in a liberal state to kind of help efforts that are going on in more conservative places?
Well, I mean, I think you can do that, and I think it's great to contribute to. There are a lot of organizations that are actually doing great organizing work around the country. You know, Indivisible, certainly, I mean, Planned Parenthood, we organize in 50 states. There's a lot of folks that are doing that. But I would actually like join up with your friend over here, which is actually change the state senate in the state of New York, and that would be huge. Because I do think it's like we have to have places that are our North Star, right? Because I think to your point. So I think this is a place where, change starts at home, and if there are things you can dig in and do here, you should join up and make New York the envy of the nation in terms of its support for reproductive rights. That would be awesome.
Hi, I'm Juliet. I'm with my friend Io. We're sophomores in high school. We're really excited to be here. You're such an inspiration. Well, we're very passionate about like women's issues and whatever, and so are a lot of our friends in high school. But we hear like all kinds of terrible, gross things in the hallways and whatever. And I don't know. I guess my question is like how, because there's also such a stigma around like being a feminist and like being a social justice warrior and whatever. Like how to be confident in our activism and like not let that bring us down, and then also how to maybe talk to people who say things that are like kind of mean and without being pretentious and without like trying to, tell them that they're wrong and that we're better than them or whatever, which is like not true, but how to approach that.
Okay, let's hear it. Look, I think it's, you're doing all the right things. You obviously have a huge support group here. And I think one of the things too is you should make sure, if you're looking for a place to kind of connect and be an activist, definitely connect with us at Planned Parenthood, because that's one of the ways that we do a ton of work to actually provide leadership opportunities for young people in junior high and high school, and they're now leading some of our most important parts of the organization. So I think there's like a real opportunity. And I mean, I don't know, I think it's okay not to be in the majority in your high school, because people are going to remember you. And like when I remember when in 8th grade, I wore a black armband. I was the only kid in my 8th grade to wear a black armband protesting the Vietnam War. And I lived in Texas, and the principal like called me to his office. And I had never even met the principal before. His name was Tom Heston. I'll never forget him. And it was kind of funny because he was really mad, and he said, "I'm going to call your mother." And I said, "Well, you better be happy you didn't get her on the phone." And so I'm not going to lie, I was kind of scared because I was always like a really good student and everything. I'd never been to the principal's office, but I was like, if just wearing this armband about something I believed in could get me called to the principal's office, that's when I knew I wanted to be an organizer. And I think the same, like for you all, right? It's like when you stand up for what you believe in, you're going to be shocked at the people. There are going to be people who make fun, and like that's always true, but there are going to be people who go like, wow, that's amazing. To stand up for what you believe in. And if you can do it in, what grade are you in?
10th grade.
10th grade?
Yes,
okay.
girl.
Yeah. Definitely on the path to success. And I think it's so, I'll tell you one other funny story. It's kind of an odd story, but so when I went to college, I was from Texas. I'd never been out of Texas, and I got into school in Rhode Island, and which we'd never been to. And my mother and I drove in a station wagon to Rhode Island, and I went to Brown University. I totally didn't fit in. I mean, I was like such a nerd. I didn't know any of the cool things that kids in Rhode Island, but I became an activist in college, and In fact, I missed my graduation at Brown because we were protesting the fact that Brown invested in, had not divested from South Africa. And someone had to hold the banner, unfurl the banner outside of graduation. And so I was always kind of in the outs at Brown. That was like, I was just one of these serious activists. But here's a funny thing. Brown did eventually divest from South Africa because a lot of other colleges did, because young people spoke out. And it was a couple of decades later they came back to Brown and they gave me an honorary degree along with Nelson Mandela, who was the first democratically elected president of South Africa post-apartheid. And which was, to me, again, I know this is a long time, right, to wait 20 or 30 years for justice, but I think it's just, I think it's one of those things you just have to remember that you're going to fight for things you're not going to win immediately, but in the long haul, the world's going to get more progressive, and it's going to get more progressive because of young women like you. So.
A sophomore in high school and you're an activist, or whether you're trying to safeguard the right to an abortion here in New York City or New York State, or whether you're contemplating running for office somewhere around the country, the answer to your queries and what to do is simply channel Cecile Richards.